You don't follow the rules.
Vietnam. Ships.
All right, y'all, welcome. We're going to get started here. Thank you all so much for joining us. Excited to see all of you. We are thrilled that you're here. We're really lucky to have Frank Mullen here. I'll introduce him in a moment. So welcome to this month's Sierra Speaker Series. The Sierra Speaker Series is a collaborative effort between California State Parks and the Sierra State Parks Foundation. And the goal is to connect our community to the rich natural and cultural history of our region. So you can visit parks.ca.gov. You can also visit sierrastateparks.org to learn how you can donate, get involved with our programming, also get a full list of all the upcoming events that both state parks and Sierra State Parks Foundation are putting on throughout the year. My name is Jeremy Lynn. I'm the park interpreter based here at this park, and I work at several other parks. All right, great. So, we're going to introduce here Caleb Greenwood. Caleb Greenwood went into the wilderness west of the Mississippi River 3 years after the return of Lewis and Clark. He died during the gold rush. His adventures on the frontier were remarkable, yet most people, even Western history buffs, have never heard of him. Old Greenwood is, as he is known, was a mountain man in the beaver trade until about 1835. In 1844, he signed on as a guide for the Stephen Townsend Murky wagon party, which named the Truckee River, and was the first party to take wagons up and over Donner Pass. 3 years later, Caleb and his sons assisted in the rescue of the snowbound Donner Party. During the gold rush, Greenwood spun tales of lost California lodes in order to separate greenhorns from their grub stakes. He's a human metaphor for the opening of the West. Please help me welcome Caleb Greenwood.
This here lake's gotten a bit more crowded since the first time I've seen it. And I heard the gentleman mention Lewis and Clark. Well, I know a few things about Lewis and Clark. Brace yourselves. Lewis and Clark were dandified. They were just top hat wearing city folk. Now, I'm not talking about the men that went with it. Those were genuine trappers, mountain men, French trappers, and like Charbonneau and the rest of them. But Lewis and Clark themselves were desk-bound politicians. And when they went west, when they went up the Missouri River, what do they bring with them? Chests of scientific instruments, chests of medicines, chests of Sunday go-to-meeting clothes, and a collapsible boat. A collapsible boat! It's a crazy world. They were bringing civilization with them. Well, a mountain man don't need such foo-for-oh. All a mountain man needs is buckskins, a hawking gun, an Arkansas toothpick, and a bag of possibles. And when you get down to it, a mountain man don't even need that. I mentioned Lewis and Clark. Well, there were a fellow went with him named Coulter, John Coulter. And Coulter, when he got out in the wilderness with those two captains out on a picnic, he come back with the two captains and Charbonneau and the rest of them. And when he neared St. Louis, there were trappers coming in the other direction, so he turned around and went back to the mountains. Stayed there a couple of years, a couple of trapping seasons, was coming back with his pelts, and saw more trappers coming in the opposite direction, going west. So he had his partner sell his pelts in St. Louis and went back out to the high country with the third group of trappers. Now, Coulter, he he was a legend among mountain men because, as I mentioned, you might need buckskins or a knife or whatever, but Coulter was the exception. You see, one day Coulter was going down the river with a partner of his, checking their traps, and he come around the bend of the river, and there's a whole village full of Blackfeet. Well, Blackfeet are not friendly to trappers or most of the other tribes for that matter. And so Coulter started rowing to get away from him, and his partner picked up his rifle. That was a mistake. His partner got hit with so many arrows he looked like a porcupine. And so Coulter gave up, put up his hands, and the Blackfeet told him to come up to shore, and Coulter rowed up to shore. And when he got up there, Blackfeet stripped him down and were talking about what to do with him. And finally one of them Indians said, "How fast can you run?" And Coulter said, "He was as fast as a turtle." And this pleased the Blackfeet because they aren't very sportsmanlike. And so they gave Coulter a little head start, maybe 100 yards or so, and let him run barefoot and naked. And then they lit off after him. And there were probably 150 braves going after him in that run. But Coulter wasn't no turtle. He was Quicksilver. He was well known to be the best runner out in the mountains. And so Coulter ran and ran, kept looking over his shoulder, and one by one, those braves, the Blackfoot braves, started dropping out of the chase. And then, as probably 2-3 miles up, he turned around, there was only one Indian behind him. And so Coulter stopped, reversed himself, tackled the man, took away his lance, and killed him with his own lance. Then he broke the lance, grabbed the tip of the lance, and ran some more, and got to the river. He hid out under a raft, a driftwood, in that river, and when the Blackfoot caught up with him, they couldn't find him. And using nothing but that broken off tip of a lance, and naked, he made his way back to Fort Kyle. And that's just one example of resourcefulness that the mountain men had. Now, you may have heard of Hugh Glass. Have you ever heard of Hugh Glass? Well, he's a bit more famous than Coulter. Hugh Glass had a similar experience, only it was much worse. He was out with Ashley's brigade, and they were about 200 miles from the fort, the nearest fort, and they were in the brush, and there was a mama grizzly there with 2 cubs. And Coulter came upon that grizz, and the mama went and defended her cubs and charged Coulter 3 times. And she laid open his side, and his back broke several of his ribs, laid open the side of his head, and broke his leg. And now Coulter's companions killed the grizz, but Coulter couldn't be moved, although they did put him on a travois for half a day, and it was just getting worse and worse. So the rest of the brigade went forward, and the captain left 2 men to stay with Coulter. It was figured he was with Hugh Glass. It was figured he was a goner. And so these men were supposed to stay with him until he died and then give him a decent burial and get back to the brigade. Well, that didn't work out because Hugh Glass kept hanging on to life. And after a couple of days, these 2 men, actually one of them was a boy named Jim Bridger, just fresh from the mountains, a couple of months by that time. And so the 2 men saw the sign, the Indian sign, Rickery Indians, and decided that he's going to die anyway, so they took his possibles bag, his rifle, and his knife, and headed back to the brigade. And when they got there, they told Ashley that Hugh Glass was dead. But Hugh Glass did not die. He crawled. When he came to, he crawled for a day and a night, came upon a wrecked, fallen tree, that was rotted, and water had collected in it, had something to drink, and ate bugs for a while, and then kept crawling and crawling and crawling, and made his way to a Cheyenne River, and made a raft, a makeshift raft, had set his own leg, and got in on that raft and floated all the way down to the fort. His whole journey took 6 weeks and covered 200 miles. So that's the way it is with a mountain man. They don't need no chest of medicines. Mountain man gets better or he dies. That's just the way it is in the mountains. And so I knew all those youngins. Jedediah Strong Smith, Thomas Broken Hand Fitzpatrick. I was already in the mountains for years before they came in and started trapping beaver. I traveled among all the tribes. Pawnee, the Shawnee, Sioux, Cheyenne, Snake, and I met all the chiefs of these tribes, and the Crow. Took a Crow wife named Bathsheba. Had 7 children with Bathsheba. And I was well known in the mountains, but I didn't read nor write, so never left any journals or no penny newspaper man ever wrote about me like they did with Jed Smith and some of the other ones. But it was well known that I was half Grizz and half Gator, straight as shot and big as liar, from Coulter's Hell down to Tallis. When I say big as liar, I mean tall tale teller. That's a talent that is prized among the mountain men sitting around the campfire. And I was pretty good at it, but there was one better than me. His name was Jim Beckworth. But this one time, I topped Beckworth. And I did it in a way that affected the whole rest of his life, changed the course of the man's life. You see, I told you I lived with a Crow, married a Crow woman, and Jim was there, mountain man, Jim Beckworth was there trading with the Crow, and he didn't speak no Crow, but I did. So I was interpreting for him. And we were sitting there with a bunch of the Crow men sitting around, and Beckworth was showing them his goods, and they asked me why he was more dark complected than most of the Americans they had seen. And that's because his mama was a slave and his father was a planter. And old Jim lit out to the west and became a free man out west, but that's not what I told him. I said, well, he's darker because he's a Crow himself. He was stolen from the Crow when he was a pup by the Cheyenne. And the Crow looked at each other because they know that the Cheyenne were famous for generations for making raids on the Crow camps and stealing their children. And so once they started talking about it among themselves, an old woman come up and she looked at Jim and claimed that she was his mom. She claimed she recognized him. And at that point, all the Crow men got up and the women got up and they started dancing and singing and beating drums and giving Jim presents, and he didn't know what was going on. I never told him. And they were honoring him, and finally, I told him what had happened, and he played along with it. And to this day, Jim Beckworth is a war chief of the Crow Nation. Well, that's the one time I got the better of Jim Beckworth. Yeah, I've been all over this great land from the Yellowstone down the new state of Texas and along the Arkansas River and up and down the coast of California. I didn't set out to be a mountain man. I didn't set out to be a Daniel Boone sort of fella. I was born in 1763 in Virginia, the western part of that state. My daddy was a farmer, and I figured I would take over that farm someday and probably die, and get married, die on the property. But when I was 18, I killed a man. Don't fret yourself, you need to kill him. But nonetheless, the law in the next county was after me. So my daddy gave me a horse and some money and told me to light out for a home. So I did. I went toward the Mississippi River, down Kentucky, Tennessee, all the way down to New Orleans. And in 1809, I was in St. Louis, and I joined Manuel Leese's expedition, going out west, gone up the Missouri River, and never really looked back at civilization. Those were good times as a trapper. I learned to trade from the best of them, Charbonneau and Coulter. And I would have stayed out in the mountains forever. Beaver shined for a while. You could get, well, if you don't know nothing about beaver, when you skin a beaver, you take the pelt, that's called a plume. And the best price we ever had for a plume of beaver was $9. A plume weighs about 1.5 pounds. And for a few years it was $9 a plume, prime, not summer furs or kits, but prime beaver. And we would trap all season, fall and winter. And then in the summer, we would go to rendezvous. And that was my favorite time of year, it was July. We would meet at various points around the west, Green River, Bear River, Jackson Hole. It was all preordained where we were going to go. And when we got there, we'd commence a party, lasted a month. And that's the only time you might have a partner or two when you're trapping or be part of a larger company with the American Fur Company or one of the other companies, but generally it was a lonely life, wild and perilous. But at rendezvous, you saw everybody, you saw all your friends, and you commenced that party. You also got resupplied for the year. Now, I could trap maybe 300 beeves a year, sometimes almost 400, depending on the places I was trapping. But Jed Smith, though, first year of the rendezvous, 1825, he come in with 628 pelts, 628 plume, and that was when beaver was $9 a plume. Now, he didn't trap all that. He traded to various tribes for a lot of it, but still, he trapped a lot. The thing with Jed Smith is he didn't have any bad habits. He didn't drink, he didn't gamble, he didn't womanize. He just sat by the campfire and read the Bible. He was a good mountain man otherwise, though. And I guess the best year I had 340 pelts that year. And you could make thousands of dollars. There was no doubt about it. It was a lucrative thing. But the problem was you had to get resupplied for the coming season. And the only place you could buy anything was rendezvous, unless you want to go all the way back to St. Louis. And things that were pennies in St. Louis cost dollars in the mountains because of the market. Whiskey was $5. How was it? $5 a gallon in St. Louis. They water it down and sell it for $8 a pint, half bigger. That was the kind of market. Lead, 6 cents a pound. $2 a pound in the mountains. Sugar, 10 cents a pound. $2 a pound in the mountains. Coffee, 10 cents a pound in St. Louis. $2 a pound in the mountains. Everything was $2 a pound. And there was no one else you could buy it from. But still, it was worthwhile, that life. And I probably never would have left the Rockies if something didn't happen to the market for beaver. I mentioned $9 a plume. That was the best price for a few years, but then the price went down. $8 a plume, $7 a plume, $5 a fluid. Finally down to $3 a fluid. And that's $2 a pound. And I asked Jim Bridger, what is going on, Jim? The cost of the goods didn't go down. We were still paying 2,000% markup on our supplies, but every time we got to run, the price would go down. And Jim Bridger told me what was happening. Jim was a trained surveyor. He could read and write, and he knew things. Jim said that the fashion in Europe, Paris, and London had changed. That all those beaver pelts we were trapping was generally used to create felt hats for men and women, beaver felt. But the fashion had changed to silk. Men were wearing silk top hats instead of beaver hats, and women were wearing silk hats instead of that beaver felt. And do you know where silk comes from? Worms. It comes from worms. And so I said, Jimbo, what are we going to do? How are we going to make a living now? And Bridger says, well, we could go to St. Louis and buy some teeny tiny little traps. I ain't trapping no worms. It ain't dignified. And so I had to leave the mountains with no way to make a living. Bridger and a fellow named Vasquez started a trading post up there in off the Little Sandy up in Wyoming country, just north of the Salt Lake. And I went back to Missouri, in the northwestern part of the state with Back Chica and my two sons. And I homesteaded a farm there, just like my daddy had done. And we worked that farm. We had 6 more children, but one died infant. And I would have probably stayed on that farm forever. And I noticed that after a time, some wagons came through my property. And they had altered their trail just to talk to me because they had heard I was familiar with the mountains. And they were missionaries. They were on their way to Washington country to bring Jesus to the Cayuse and the Flathead and the Chinook. They were missionaries. And they asked me if I had any advice for them in converting the Indians to Christianity. And I did. I said, hold on to your hair. And sure enough, several years later, the Whitmans lost their hair and their lives out there. And other wagons came through, other settlers for Oregon, and every time they asked me if I'd guide them, if I'd go along with them. But I was happy on the farm with that chica, finest woman God ever made, Indian or white. And like I said, I would have stayed there for the rest of my days, except that chica died, giving birth to our youngest, Sarah Mojave. And I just didn't have the farm in England no more. And so I sold the property and left the younger kids with a neighbor lady and me and my two oldest, John and Brittany, headed out west. And I was asked to pilot a wagon train. They asked me if I could get wagons over the Sierra Nevada. It was said that that was impossible, that the passes were too steep and too narrow. You couldn't get wagons over the Sierra Nevada. And they asked me if I could do it. I said, yes. Yes, I can. They offered me $500. I tell them to get wagons to the moon for $500. And so me and John and Brittany signed on with the party, Townsend Stevens Murphy Party, as it's known today. And we took the regular Oregon Trail to Fort Hall, which is Idaho country. Indians call it Pocatello, that place where Fort Hall is. And when we got to the trading post at Fort Hall, instead of continuing west to Oregon, we went south. to kick up the Humboldt River in what is now Nevada. And we picked up the Humboldt River and then followed the Humboldt River west. And I'll tell you, famine sits enthroned on that river. No grass, no trees, just a little trickle going through the middle of the sagebrush, the Greenwood Desert. And so we followed that river thinking it would take us to the Sierra Nevada. And the river sank into the desert and was gone. And we was a mite bewildered for a while. And then we looked across the flat desert, the playa. The Spaniards called it a beach, that kind of flat desert with nothing growing on it. And we see a lone figure walking towards us. And so we raised our rifles since we did not know this Indian's intent. And when he got closer, he said, "Truckee! Truckee! Truckee!" And we took that to be his name. And it turned out his intentions were peaceful. Now, he was a Paiute. I don't speak any Paiute, but I know sign and I know some Shoshone, and there's a relationship, some of the words with Paiute. So we squatted in the dirt and scratched in the sand. And between that and some sign language and some shared words, he told us that if we crossed that playa, that desert, 2 days, we'd reach another river. And that river came out of the west, came out of the mountains. And if we followed that river west, we would get to a pass and go over the mountains to California. Well, we didn't know if he was trying to trick us and trap us or what, but we decided to trust him. And we took our wagons across that desert. Sure enough, a day and a night later, we come upon a cottonwood forest with a river running right through the middle of it. Beautiful river. And we didn't know what the Paiute name for that river was, so we decided to name it after our guide, Truckee. And that's the name the river has today. And I heard tell, and the lake also be called Truckee's Lake, but they changed it for some reason. And the pass as well was called Truckee's Pass, and that's got another name now. But I hear tell they might have a town here someday called Truckee too. And you know, I come to find out that wasn't that Indian's name after all. It turns out in old Paiute, the word Truckee means everything's all right. In other words, that fellow was saying, "Don't shoot me." So anybody who lives in that new town will be living in the "don't shoot me" town. And probably won't even know it. And so we followed that river through a meadow at the foot of the Sierra with grass to the horses' knees, and then went up through Truckee Canyon. And that was a fearsome canyon. Nearly broke every axle on every wagon. Nearly killed the oxen, but we got through it. And we got to this spot right here. And just had one more hill to cross. But when we got up to the pass, it was a granite wall. And it was snowing here at the lake. And so we took 5 wagons up to the pass, left the other 6 here with 3 men, and got the spot wagons over that hill by taking the wagons apart, getting pulleys, and pulling the running gear and the wagon boxes after we emptied the freight out over the pass, and there was a notch that was just wide enough for 1 ox to walk through with a couple inches on each shoulder. And so we got the oxen over there too. And those 5 wagons and the men with them went down, and myself went down to Sutter's Fort. Now the 3 men we left up here at the lake, that was November 1844. And it was snowing and snowing and snowing. So these 3 men got a little annoyed at the snow and a little worried that if they stayed up here much longer, they'd starve, because they couldn't find any game up here. So they lit out on makeshift snowshoes, but the youngest of them, a fellow named Moses Schallenberger, who was around 17 years old, Schallenberger was taken ill and he couldn't make it out, so he came back here. The men had already built a cabin, about 100 yards or less that way is the side of it. And Schallenberger stayed in that cabin, which was eventually covered up in snow, and there were animal traps in one of the wagons that were left behind. So he set these traps and he lived on red foxes, trapping red foxes. And he spent his days getting a college education, because Dr. Townsend had brought more than 100 books with him in one of the wagons. So in the daytime, he sat out in the sun reading Dr. Townsend's medical books and his other books that were sitting in the wagon, and he made it through the winter, or at least till February, when the two men that had left him here felt kind of guilty about it, and they came back up and let him out on snowshoes in February of 1845. And so that's the first wagons over the Sierra, opening up the Truckee Trail, the branch of the California Trail. And I never really thought I would see that pass again, and I especially did not want to travel up Truckee Canyon. So the following season, John and Britton and I blazed a new trail that would go from this lake down to the valley. And it would not follow Truckee Canyon. It would be a horseshoe around Dog Valley, Hope Valley, and Russell Valley, and then get down to the flatlands at the foot of the Sierra, so that no wagons would ever have to come up that canyon again. I led wagons that following season, and then in 1846 I was at Fort Hall, willing to guide wagons, but the Donners never made it to Fort Hall. They took that shortcut, that ill-advised Hastings cutoff. And of course, any mountain man would have told them, and did tell them, that it was suicidal. My friend, who was an army buddy of Mr. Reed with the party, met them at Fort Laramie. And he told them, do not take it. He said, stick to the regular route and never leave it, and you'll probably get to California. But if you take this unproven shortcut with women and children and milk cows and wagons and oxen, you will probably all die. But Mr. Reed, he wanted to get to California before everybody else and get the best land grants from the alcalde, the magistrate, the mayor at Sutter's Fort. And so he decided to take that shortcut, thinking it would save weeks of travel and save 300 miles on the journey. Instead, it added weeks and 150 miles to the regular route. And so when them Donners, who had no mountain man with them, as I said, got up here on the last day of October 1846, the blizzards kept coming, and they couldn't get over that hill. I had heard about their plight when I was in Yerba Buena, which has recently been changed. They changed the name to San Francisco after the bay. And my son, Britton, and I helped. I didn't come up here, but Britton did. Lost a few toes to frostbite carrying the children out of here. Of the 81 people that went up the hill, about half died, and most of the men died. Most of the women and school-aged children survived. I went back the following year to bring the young kids out. I had gotten a homestead, got the land grant from the alcalde in a place you may have heard of called Napa. Very nice area. And I started a trading post there and a little homestead farm. And I went back to get the younger kids, and on the way back here, or way back to California, who do I meet in the 40-mile desert with the Mullen battalion? Coming back from the Mexican War, with Fremont under arrest. Best place for them, I think. They were bringing Fremont back to get court-martialed. And they told me that gold had been discovered in California. At Sutter's Mill, a fellow named Marshall found gold in the mill trace, couldn't keep his mouth shut. And before you know it, it was in all the newspapers. And there was about to be a gold rush in California. Well, that darn gold rush was a ruination of the whole place, I'll tell you. People came out there, they were peeing in all the streams, they were just ramshackling through the underbrush and destroying Indian villages, using the Indians for target practice, buying up all the supplies at Sutter's and Yerba Buena. Oregonians came down too. They were the first to arrive. I don't like Oregonians. And I was kind of disappointed after being in California for a year, thinking it was going to be a paradise, and then finding out that not only was civilization coming, but it included Oregonians. And people using Indians for target practice and all kinds of yahoos coming in from the east. So I was pretty disappointed in the whole gold rush operation. But then, everywhere I went, these newcomers, these greenhorns, wanted to talk to the old mountain man. They wanted to know if I seen any signs of gold in my travels. Well, I'd sit there at the bar at Sutter's or in Yerba Buena, and I'd say, well, gold. Signs of gold, eh? How about a lake of gold? And they were interested. They said, well, old Greenwood, tell us more. Where is this lake of gold? And I told them one time when I was leading the settlers to California, between this lake right here and Lake Bigler, which the Indians called Tahoe, over yonder, there was another little lake. And I said, us wagons, we came into that lake at sundown and camped. And the next morning, when the sun rose and got higher over that lake, the whole beach of the lake, everywhere around it, was a shining and a glittering, and it was gold. Nuggets, big as hen's eggs, just waiting for somebody to come along and pick them up. And they said, oh, Greenwood, can you lead us there? And I said, well, I'm a little old for that. But my son John and my son Britton could probably take you over there, and I could sell you some supplies from my trading post. That probably only cost you about $800. And Britton and John's time probably wouldn't go above 500. And so they amassed an expedition to go look for the Lake of Gold. And John led them up one side of the Sierra and down the other. Never did find it. But this here gold rush ain't too bad after all, I think. And I appreciate being able to make a living on it without having to actually dig hand for it. And so, just wanted to let you know that if you want to hear tales of the West and tales of the opening of California, you best ask the mountain man, not some silk hat wearing dandy from St. Louis. And if you do come out west, the best advice I can give you is hold on to your hair. Thank you.
questions for old Greenwood here.
Yes, ma'am.
What's in your purse?
Ah,
I mean, your
it's a possible bag, ma'am, not a purse. But in there we got a fire